afternoon and welcome back everyone to the News Philanthropy Summit. I'm Annie McCain-Madonia, and I just want to thank everyone for an outstanding 2 days of conversation. I hope you've been learning a lot and connecting with folks in the field and getting a lot out of our time together. It's hard to believe that it's time for our final session. We're going to wrap up our summit with Dick Tofel leading a keynote conversation with Texas Tribune Editor-in-Chief Sewell and Chief Development Officer Terry Quinn about how to manage the ever-important relationship between the newsroom and the fundraising team. Before I introduce them, I just want to share a couple of reminders and rules of the road. Everyone who's attending the summit has agreed to abide by our event principles, which are based on respect and creating a brave space that allows us all to learn together. We hope you'll continue that. We'll have time at the end of the conversation to take questions, so please use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your Zoom screen to share your questions with the speakers. The discussion is being recorded and will be shared publicly after the summit, so you can go back and revisit it, and others who can't be here can learn from our panel. Closed captioning is available and can be turned on by clicking the button labeled CC Show Captions at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And please use the hashtag NewsPhilSummit if you'd like to post about the summit on Twitter or other platforms. So now I am so pleased to introduce our group. First, the moderator. Dick Tofel, who many of you may know, was the founding general manager and first employee of ProPublica from 2007 to 2012, and its president from 2013 until September 2021. During Dick's tenure, ProPublica won 7 Pulitzer Prizes, 7 National Magazine Awards, 5 Peabody Awards, 3 Emmy Awards, and 11 George Polk Awards. Among other honors, ProPublica also became a fundraising powerhouse, raising more than $225 million from donors other than its founding funders. Before ProPublica, Dick had a storied career at the Wall Street Journal and at Dow Jones. He also served as general counsel of the Rockefeller Foundation and president of the International Freedom Center, a museum planned for the World Trade Center site. In 2022, he published his 13th book, Elements of Nonprofit Management, with the Lenfest Institute. Sewell joined the Texas Tribune as editor-in-chief in October of 2021. Previously, he was a deputy managing editor and then the editorial page editor at the Los Angeles Times, where he oversaw coverage that was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for editorial writing in 2021. Chan worked at the New York Times from 2004 to 2018 and began his career as a local reporter at the Washington Post in 2000. A child of immigrants, Chan was the first in his family to graduate from college, attending Harvard and then Oxford. He serves on numerous boards, including Columbia Journalism Review, Freedom House, Harvard Magazine, and News Leaders Association. He's also a member of PEN America, the Council on Foreign Relations, and numerous journalism organizations, and was recently elected to the board of the Pulitzer Prizes in 2022. Terry Quinn, who I'm so happy to also call a great friend, is a 6th-generation Texan and graduate of the University of Texas at Austin. She's worked as a volunteer and professional fundraiser for over 23 years to raise funds for many nonprofit organizations in Austin and around Texas, most recently, the Nature Conservancy of Texas and the Contemporary Austin. For the Tribune, Terry leads the work with foundations and individuals whose philanthropic support make the mission of the Tribune possible. Terry has also helped to launch the Lenfest News Philanthropy Network, has been here from the very beginning, and has been a wonderful partner and friend in this work. So thank you, Terry. Anyway, thanks to all of you on our panel. Thanks for everyone being here. And here's Dick, Terry, and Sewell.
Thanks so much, Annie. Thank you all for being here. I should explain that Terry, there are 300,000 people in and around Austin who are without power today. Sewell has asked every single one of them to send him a DM. I'm not sure how he's going to handle that. But one of them who does not need to send him a DM because she's on the Zoom with us is Terry. So I'm especially appreciative to her, but that is why you see her photograph and not her moving image. She is sitting bravely freezing in her living room without heat, but I'm told a regular supply of hot coffee. So thank you both very much for joining me. The Texas Tribune, I think it is fair to say, excuse me, was the first major inroad in the sort of current flowering of local news, nonprofit news around the country. And at least in my vision, and I think other people's, the most successful so far. So it's a critical model. And that's why we wanted to close out this summit with this conversation. We're going to focus on the roles of news and development and how they interact. I thought we would start first with Terry, just walking us through the Tribune's revenue overview and sort of laying out what its funding buckets are, and then we'll take it from there.
Great. I am so thrilled to be with you all. I hope you can hear me okay.
Absolutely.
Great. So we've really had a great 13 years up till now, and have struck on what we think is a great model for sustainability. And it's based on not being dependent on any one type of revenue. So to give you an idea, last year, individual support from major donors, which we categorize as donors of 5,000 and above, were 28% of our budget. Our budget last year was over 10 million. We had 26% support from foundations, 20% from our website sponsors, euphemism for ads, 13% from our sponsorship of events, 8% from membership, and the rest from earned income. So the reason we are so committed to this diverse mix is that at any time, if any one area is not doing as well, we can balance out our operational needs through one of the other revenue buckets. And we saw this for sure in 2020 when we saw a decline in corporate support, and philanthropy sort of filled in that gap. So that's sort of the basis of our support.
Great. Terry, those, I mean, that the diversity of that mix is, I think, literally the envy of the industry. One thing I just want to zero in on is the events revenue, just for a moment. 13%, which is a lot. The Tribune Fest has become an amazing phenomenon, and you have lots of other events, I know, all the time around the state. Is that 13% a gross figure or a net figure for the events?
Oh, and actually I was rounding down, it's 14%, pardon me. But, and last year, so I'm sorry, I inverted two numbers. The events were 17% last year, and the website was 14%, sorry. So ask the question again, Dick.
Yeah, the 17% for events.
Yeah.
Is a gross number or a net number? Because
that's a gross number. With, I believe, if you, we've never factored in, I haven't seen on here the entire festival budget, but that doesn't include the ticket sales as well that we encounter. But I believe the net would be closer to $1.2 million for the festival.
okay, and the total budget of the Tribune, just to remind people, is now roughly what?
13 million this year. Last year was let's see, 11.9.
Okay, enormously helpful. And then maybe, Terry, you can then next explain to folks, as you laid out that set of buckets, what your staffing is for each of them, more or less. And then I want to bring it around to Sewell. But first, what the staffing is to generate all those revenues.
Exactly. So the development team, which is my team and works on all of the philanthropic support from individuals and foundations, we are 3.5 in our department. The spectacularly talented and wonderful April Hinkle is a one-woman show but has, as far as the sales go, but has someone behind the scenes on fulfillment. So there are 2 in that department. And then we have a 5-person events team when we are fully staffed.
Great. A brief ad just from me for April Hinkle as well. What ProPublica always says is that we are in business, or they are in business, to spur change. And I once said this in a meeting with April, who ran back in her office and found me this spur, which I still to this day carry in my pocket every day. So Sewell, can you, as a relatively new editor, almost a year and a half, right? There, can you tell us how you sort of interact with, relate to each of those teams differently? What's your role with each of those buckets, and how does it differ from type of revenue to type of revenue?
Hi, Dick. Thanks. Yeah, let me first begin by thanking the Lenfest Institute. I have learned so much being relatively new to nonprofit news over the past 2 days, dipping in and out of panels. And so really, I'm the one learning from you all, and just really pleased to be here right now. I had come from, roles at newspapers where I was used to dealing with, say, ad sales and circulation, and certainly with product and data teams. I think what's been new for me, though, as a journalist, is that, we have to, well, of course, we do have a certain kind of firewall between editorial and revenue, but at the same time, we're a small team. And so I'm in frequent conversations with April's revenue team, particularly over events. I'm in touch with Terry's team constantly over our grants to apply to foundations and endowments to support our mission. I actually oversee the events team. So events falls under the newsroom, and there's 2 other revenue producing functions that also fall under the newsroom. One of them is our premium newsletter known as The Blast. It's our only subscription-based product. And the other is our membership program, which has grown to 10,000 members and which works hand in glove with Terry. So that's a little bit nerve-wracking for me because I've not owned a P&L before, but those are the 3 kind of revenue generating functions that report into me, but of course are heavily interwoven with everything that April and Terry do. Our events, for example, we all have to be on board. We are responsible for the editorial programming, but of course we try to develop events that are lively, that might sell tickets, that might draw crowds. Most of our events are free except for our annual festival, and events, of course, that would interest sponsors. We're not guided first and foremost. We don't, a sponsor can't come to us and say, we'll spend only if you do this, but we of course are working to identify topics that are important to Texans and where there could be possible financial support to make the event possible.
And
So-
Dick, I wanted to add in that
Yeah.
we really are firmly, April and I firmly believe that the reason we've been so successful with our events is because they are in the editorial department. They are part of our mission, they're part of our work, and they have the gravitas and the editorial, seriousness that our sponsors are looking for. So these are not, fluff events. They're not, things that happen, outside of the editorial vision. And I think that's, been the key to success for that.
Great. So there's also a CEO of the Tribune who is, I guess, both your and Terry's boss, correct? And until 5 weeks ago, that was legendary Evan Smith, and it is now his very exciting successor, Samuel Sewell, right? But I want to understand what your role as the editor is in each of these things. So for instance, do you go on ad sales calls? Do you go on fundraising pitches? How does that work?
I've not been on sponsorship calls. If it were the right context and my participation would be helpful, I wouldn't mind. I don't think that's inappropriate. Anyone who's edited a feature section at a major newspaper knows that, being aware of what advertisers are looking for at a magazine or a weekly section, is part of what we do. I would say I've been a little bit more involved in the development side, but only to the extent that Terry and Sewell deem it to be helpful. So for example, I've looked over some, not most, but some grant proposals. Terry and I are constantly talking about ideas and ambitions that we have and ways to possibly, fund new areas of coverage. For example, in recent years, women's health, mental health, law and courts, and democracy, which is really I know we all cover democracy, but this is a job really, to be frank, focused on threats to democracy. And those are areas of coverage that we've been able to fund working together with development. Recently, we had an event this week for some major donors, especially foundations, and Sonal and I both gave introductory remarks, but then we put our journalists first to talk about what they're working on. And to demonstrate their policy expertise. And so, when appropriate, we're very happy to be called upon.
And Terry, can you talk to us about how a program grant like that evolves? We were talking in the prep session for this about, and you made the very good point about the importance of lead time and all of this. So
Right.
maybe it's something that's gone all the way to success, at least generally, without maybe naming names unless you want to. Talk to us about how such a thing evolves.
Yeah, I think, I joined the Tribune in 2014. And when I arrived, we already were on our way to success, but there was still a very strong firewall, and there still is, between revenue and the newsroom. But it was actually so strong that the two sides weren't talking to each other at all. And what I started realizing was just we were missing opportunities, especially with foundations. You need such a long lead time. You need to, finding out a couple of weeks before something launches, it's just not enough time. So I started working hand in glove with our then editor-in-chief, Emily Ramshaw. And what I realized is that everybody else in the newsroom, came from a traditional journalism background. They didn't really understand fundraising. And when you don't understand something, you tend to distrust it. And so what I set about doing, and I think this is especially true for you wonderful journalists. And this isn't new. I've experienced this at other nonprofit organizations where there's just, you don't understand the fundraising process. So I set about demystifying it, being very transparent, promising Emily that I wouldn't submit any grants that she didn't know about, and to just really keep those lines of communication open. And over the next few years, I saw her confidence in the process build. She saw that I was very protective of the editorial integrity. In fact, Sewell likes to joke that I am a jealous guardian of editorial integrity. And that is actually something that we have not encountered people really pushing on that. We're very clear from the beginning that their gift supports our work, but gives them no say in that work. So over the years, we've been able to build a culture where the newsroom at least respects the fundraising process and also realizes what it makes happen for them. And so, but we are protective of our journalists. The event that Sewell referenced that we did this week was two panel discussions for our foundation supporters, but that's probably the closest our journalists get to those supporters each year. I was lucky that Sewell walked in to the Tribune already with a predisposition to be involved in this process. And so that's been really fortunate, because now we can talk to each other. He can bring an idea to me almost before anybody else and say, do we think there's funding for this? And it gives me enough time. And I so appreciate that trust that we have in this process. And so we've been able to, as Sewell said recently, receive funding for additional reporting positions and for a huge audience survey, things like that. And it's really because we're now meeting regularly. We do a once a month revenue meeting with the editorial team, just to talk about what's ahead. We also all participate in other meetings together. And I think just that dialogue, that constant collaboration has fostered this this better working relationship, more productive working relationship. It's never perfect, but we're also committed in this sort of cross-purpose, we all are. If we break down the silos and work together, we are so much stronger than if we are all operating in our own little worlds.
If I could just add to that quickly, Dick and Terry, Terry and I enjoy truly an amazing partnership. It is filled. I can't believe we've only worked together a year and a half because, I feel the trust is really, really complete. I'll add one more meeting. We have a once a week meeting that's very small. It's Terry, April, me, and our senior managing editor, Ian, where we're really able, cone of silence, just to bat around ideas or to talk about things where, we might need more involvement and support. Dick, I want to make a point because I do not think that what we're talking about is actually unique to nonprofit journalism. Over the past 25 years that I've been involved in journalism, starting from being an intern to being an editor-in-chief, I've seen the waves and waves of change. What I have seen is that journalists can no longer afford to not be aware of how we're funded, and frankly, how we're kind of digitally, we can't be unaware of audience and how our journalism reaches audiences. That may sound obvious, but the truth is that organizations that I've been a part of, like the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, really turned around when there started to be a greater harmonization across revenue, tech / product and user experience design, and editorial. That does not mean that all three will always have identical agendas or approaches, of course not. But if you're coming from a position where those three are either at odds with each other or don't trust each other, then your organization is terribly set back. You cannot think about, we all have to have a product mindset, right? We all have to think about, not just traditional coverage, but newsletters and podcasts and ways of reaching new audiences. We also have to, at the LA Times, we relaunched the food section, we revamped the Hollywood coverage. The truth is that editors have to have awareness. What we have to be very careful as editors is not to slip into dangerous territory. No one wants like a Salon Gate controversy. You never want to do anything where if it were public, it would in any way suggest that the journalism is compromised. Of course, that's supremely important, but you also have to make the time as an editorial leader now to really be a deep partner with your product and revenue colleagues.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I want to remind participants that the Q&A button, rather than the chat button, will make it easier. We welcome comments in the chat, but we would especially love questions in the Q&A button area so that we can get to them, which we will starting very shortly. I wanted specifically to follow up on this monthly larger meeting. So you told us who was in the smaller meeting. In the larger meeting, how many people are there from the editorial side? And one of the questions we've already gotten is, what does the agenda look like for such a meeting?
Well, Terry, either of us can address this. I'll start and then Terry can add.
Yeah.
Maybe. It's a multi-stakeholder meeting. So from editorial, you've got the top editors, you've also got the director of audience, the director of events, and really both managing editors. One oversees basically the text journalism and the other the visual journalism. From the business side, again, I try to avoid the word side even because I think that's a problematic framework sometimes. But from the revenue and product teams, we've got our chief product officer, our head of engineering, obviously April and Terry representing revenue and development, and then our news, our Rev Lab, which is led by Emily Dressler, which focuses on knowledge sharing of our best practices with other nonprofit newsrooms. There's a sponsorship director who's there. I think those are the main stakeholders. Terry, who am I leaving out? Obviously our CEO. Yeah,
and our membership director as well.
Yeah,
and it's an amazing opportunity for us to share ideas, update everyone on the status of projects, and just to also ask questions. Have you ever thought about adding a podcast to that? Those sorts of things. And it's setting that up, that knowledge sharing has just opened all sorts of possibilities. And we're really committed to that kind of working together. And it also just gives us a chance to continually remind everyone about how we are funded. And again, I keep going back to the transparency, but it really, as Sewell said, is so important for people to understand where, the source of our revenue. We try to demystify everything. I've walked through sort of the art of the ask, things like that, to make sure that that everyone understands why we're asking these questions, what we're trying to achieve, and not have it feel burdensome, but to understand that they're part of making all of this happen. We can't do it without them.
By and large, I feel our journalists get it, by the way. The highest praise I've ever heard from a Texas Tribune journalist was from one of our reporters. This is the first newsroom I've worked in where I get to truly wake up every morning thinking about how to do the best journalism. And by that, she meant not having to fear, be fear. We've been very privileged, very fortunate, but she meant not having to be fearful about, are we going to go out of business? Are we going to lay off half the staff? Are we, all these, to be frank, issues that worry a lot of journalists and I think prevent them from focusing on what they do best. In exchange for that, not in exchange for, but what we ask in turn is obviously not, journalists will never be on sales calls or approaching donors. But they, for example, when asked to speak on a panel, when asked to moderate an event at our festival and other events, the expectation is to say yes, because we do, need to share our story. And my belief is that our journalists are actually the best advertisement for what we do. And so I actually think that culture, is pretty well set. If I could bring up, because I haven't seen enough questions yet, but if I could bring up one challenge, just so you don't think we're all telling a fully rosy picture. I think one of the things that we still need to work on better in our revenue development and editorial meetings are the things we should stop doing, right? You get to a point after 12 or 13 years, and many of the newsrooms in this conference will experience this if they haven't already, where you're like, well, we've been doing this kind of because we've been doing it. And, using data to inform, well, is there a refresh that we can have in our product lineup? Is there something that we've been doing, but as we evaluate it more, we recognize that maybe it's not the maximum bang for our buck? I think that's something all organizations struggle with, but in nonprofit, especially, they're pretty consensus driven. I think it's actually important to have those at times difficult conversations, right? Because ultimately we all need to agree on where's the next incremental dollar or investment going to go. And it can't just be more always, right? I'm realistic. As an editor, I want more. But of course, as a realist, I recognize that if we're not using the resources that we've already been allocated the most effectively, then it's going to make it harder for me to make the case to our CEO and to Terry in April for why we need more resources.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Let me ask you, Sewell, you talked already about some of these program grants that you all have managed to succeed in getting that have enabled you to do some things that editorial had on their wish list. Terry, do some of those program grants start from the fundraising side? Does it happen from time to time that you end up going to the editors and say, I think there are interested funders out there about XYZ. Would you think about doing that?
That really, it tends to be the one-way street the other way. I think the only time that's really happened with us is that some funders came to us a few years ago and asked if they could hire us to put on a symposium for them. And we kicked it around. It was going to be on rural issues. And we came back to them and said, we're really not for hire, but rural Texas is a hugely important thing for us. So why don't we turn this around and we'll put on a rural symposium, and you all come in and be part of it as a sponsor. And now that's actually one of the most successful events that we do every other year. And so that's the only case I can really think of where it's the donors coming to us with an idea. We try to limit that and keep it the other way around, where we're going to people with new ideas. But that's what's so important in this dialogue, is that I talk to our funders all the time, and there have been moments where had I not been talking to the newsroom, I wouldn't have had that moment of hearing something a funder said they were interested in. And I was able to sort of make that connection and say, oh, we're interested in that too. Let's talk about adding that to our proposal. So that's where these opportunities and the conversations, even if they're just, Sewell and Ian get tired of me saying, even if it's a glimmer in your eye, I need to know about it, because I just never know where that opportunity is going to come from. And I think that's the place where we still sometimes struggle. As I'm with Sewell, we'll be, it's not all roses and everything else. But I think the hardest thing for the newsroom to grasp is that many of our donors have a very high tolerance for risk and a very high tolerance, and they love new ideas and new things, and they want to be in on that from the beginning. And so that is really hard for the newsroom, to sort of bring something to us very early, because, there's the nervousness of it may not happen, or we don't know exactly where it's going yet. And that's actually something that a lot of our funders get excited about. But it feels, it doesn't seem, very logical from the perspective of the newsroom. They want something a little bit more buttoned up and tight. And that's something that we always continue to work on.
Well, Terry really nails the journalistic persona, because if we're being frank, and this is true of me above all, journalists we're good at what we're good at, but we tend to be a little bit risk averse and sometimes a little bit slow to embrace innovation and risk taking, right? Which I think is something that we all kind of have to change, frankly. If media is going to keep up with the spirit of our times, right? We're thinking right now about audience strategies that go way beyond social media, given that social media might very well be a declining tool in terms of its effectiveness and its usefulness, right? So, that's something I'm reminded of, like the need to kind of embrace innovation and trying new things and being willing to fail, but fail quickly and then learn and iterate.
So I'd like to start pulling up some questions from the Q&A. This is a two-part question, one in response to the other, and one for each of you. How can we, I guess this is for Sewell, how can we help editorial, maybe for both of you, how can we help editorial staff better understand our fundraising strategies and overcome discomfort with the idea of asking for philanthropic support? You've already talked about this a little bit, Sewell, but if you have other things, and mostly, I guess, for Terry, how can philanthropy professionals learn more about the work our journalists do outside of the formal meetings, particularly if they're not in them, and reading, obviously, the material that's published itself?
I'll start and be very candid for a moment. There was one meeting where we were discussing a particular product, and I think someone involved in the coverage, who of course is, very, very slammed, has a big workload, but made an offhanded comment, like, I forgot what it was, Terry, but it was like, I'm not responsible for the revenue here. And obviously in a literal sense, she's correct. But sometimes I do find myself, saying to our journalists, we are a nonprofit. That is a tax status. That's not a business model. I don't care whether you're a Fortune 500 or a privately owned company or a nonprofit. And I've worked at, I think, all three types of media companies. You've got to have a revenue model, and our revenue model is, what we put out there on the website and on the annual reports. It doesn't mean that you have to go fundraise, but it does mean that we all are in this together and that we have to understand what keeps the lights on. It doesn't mean that everyone has to directly participate, but there can't be this walled off sense of like, oh, Terry's team, yeah, they pay the bills and we just have to report. Most of the time, that is what we mainly do, report, and without other considerations. But when we're thinking, especially about new products, we've got to take into account, what might be widely read. We have to become more metrics aware. And I think that's my role in that.
Yeah, and it's interesting with what we see in the Rev Lab as we offer courses and work hand in hand with the Lenfest folks in talking about how to raise funds for journalism. We've really seen two types of development staff. Some that are longtime development professionals like me who've come to journalism later, but don't have that background. And then the flip side are people who are longtime journalists who are suddenly, in the world of fundraising. And so it's been interesting to have this dialogue back and forth, and there's strengths on both sides. But I don't think that you have to necessarily come from this world, from the journalism world to be successful. I think it's more about passion. It's more about belief in the mission. I just spend as much time as possible talking with our staff members, attending every event. I learned so much just being around the newsroom and participating in conferences like this. I think we're all big believers in being lifelong learners, and the more we can do to raise awareness for best practices in fundraising, which is really what this is all about, but also bridge the gap in journalism around where does your funding come from, but that we can make this work. But I've loved getting to understand the industry. I've been passionate about it from the beginning, but it's been a learning curve for sure.
So we've got, first of all, I want to say more, not only questions, but really good questions in the Q&A than we're going to be able to get to, but keep them coming. But I want to apologize in advance. It's already clear we won't get to all of them, but I'm going to try to organize them a little. Here's a discrete question about events, and then I want to open to a bigger question about events. The discrete question is, how would you respond to the sponsor of an event who would like to have one of their experts participate as a panelist?
Nope, not going to happen.
No.
No. So if we do have a panelist who also, they can't also be a sponsor. So it's one or the other. Okay.
I will tell you, I have no idea if they still do it. I left there 17 years ago, but at the Wall Street Journal, where I was once upon a time the assistant publisher, they did that all the time. Here's the more general question, and it also comes in two parts. One, a question and then a reply. How do you scale up events from scratch or almost from scratch? And maybe even more importantly, someone asks, are events one of the revenue streams you would recommend a startup begin early, and how, especially given that it does take a lot of work to mount it?
I'm giggling a little bit on that part. They are a lot of work. So let's, be clear on that. But you also have to remember that we've been doing events since day one because we do consider it part of our editorial mission. We think of it first and foremost as one of the best ways you can do civic engagement is to get a group together, have elected officials or other thought leaders in front of a group of everyday Texans. That is our mission at some of its best. And so we've been doing this from the beginning. It's evolved over time, and we've learned how to somewhat, we have the template, we have the blueprint that we're able to sort of plug in over and over again. Of course, we had to relearn all of this during the pandemic and switch to a purely hybrid or virtual mode. And now we're in a hybrid production. I think our events over time have become far more technical and technically complicated. But, we don't think of it as separate from our mission. And so, but I understand for orgs thinking about adding that, it is, you can start small and just, and put together these, sort of town hall style gatherings and talk with sponsors about this. And then, the Tribune Festival has evolved from, I've been attending since year one. it's amazing to see how it's evolved. But it's taken, 12 years to get to where it is now.
Dick, I'd point that to this as an area where I have had some getting used to. I have had some things to get used to. Look, every organization, you want your journalists to do broadcast spots and some public speaking, but to carry off events well, they have to really be authentic from the journalism. And I think that we were obviously very lucky in having a co-founder, Evan Smith, who's legendarily good at moderating and interviewing. He had a PBS program where he interviewed, major people. But also I'm seeing in our newsroom, the need to make sure that we continue having a culture of people who feel comfortable, navigating in public. Not everyone is. Some people are like, oh, I just want to ask my questions one-on-one. The idea of doing so on a stage makes me really nervous. And we've provided media training, for example, and we've just tried to give people more experience so they feel comfortable, leading a live event, because it is, a skill, but it's also a learnable skill. It's not something that I don't think I'm a master of yet, but I think I am getting better, and I'm encouraging my staff to participate.
So I just want to follow up on that, Sewell. Do you aspire at least to everybody being able to do this? Or if there are people who are just especially introverted or, frankly, I've known a couple of reporters over the years who just despise television in every possible way. Is there room for people like that? Or do you think that that's like saying, I don't really believe in typing and I'm going to write my copy out by hand, which presumably you wouldn't tolerate?
No, I don't think it's a wise idea to force or compel people, but I do think that it's usually not so binary, right? Some people who might not be comfortable initially, if you give them a small event to do, or maybe something that isn't even recorded or broadcast right away, they might become more comfortable over time. You also recognize who in your newsroom really kind of loves it, right? I'm not talking about becoming Anderson Cooper. I'm talking about leading panel discussions, but some of our reporters are actually really good at it and enjoy it and see it also as a way to source build. And that's really, really great. You want to encourage that. It should be something that people see as part of their career development, not as something that's imposed on them.
It really can be such gratifying work. When we go, especially when we take these conversations to rural parts of Texas or parts that just don't have these opportunities so often, people come up to us afterwards, thanking us for bringing this conversation to their communities, praising us for, the quality of the conversation. And it's very energizing. It really does allow you to sort of now and then step out of your, because we tend to be hard on ourselves and not see, everything that's so great. And then you get that feedback and you think, oh, okay, this is great. We can keep going. This hard work is worth it.
Here's a really great question, which I'm just going to read and let you both have at. It says, something I've been thinking about recently is the issue of pay equity and how smaller news orgs, and particularly news orgs that serve communities of color or those otherwise disenfranchised, frequently get smaller grants, and how that translates into wage issues for the journalists that work for those orgs. Have you been able to have conversations about wage equity in journalism with funders?
Wow, that's a really, really great question. Terry, do you want to take a stab at that? Because I've been in fewer funder meetings than you have.
Yeah, I will say that what's really come up with funders is more around DEI issues and, our sincere work to make sure that our staff reflects the diversity of Texas. So the funding equity has not come up as much with funders. Now, as the Tribune, it's very much something that we've worked on and are committed to. So it's been more of an internal conversation than an external conversation.
Yeah, all I would add to that, I think it's important, whether you're a big or small newsroom or have, some of the built-in advantages that we might have, or a larger, covering a whole state, or versus those of, a community that might not be a high wealth community. is, funders, I think, do need to understand that this work costs money and that it's not just the bright, shiny things that need, to be invested in, but also things that are a little bit less tangible, like career development. I'm a big believer that our fellowship program, which gets out truly outstanding more marks, and we have reviews, and we have alumni and so many other very, very prestigious newsrooms. That needs to be part of our pitch to funders too. You're not just investing in the Tribune, you're investing in an information ecosystem, and you're investing in a journalism community that frankly has seen a lot of human capital kind of wiped out, right, because of the erosion of legacy media. So I think that actually making that point, including the equity issues and the DEI issues, is a pretty important message.
It's a question about growth challenges in recent years, and specifically it asks, has the decline of Facebook traffic impacted the revenue side at all? And also more even up to the minute, because I think the Facebook traffic is a sort of established fact almost everywhere. Have you all seen a decline in traffic from Twitter in the last 3 months? And you said before, Sewell, that you're thinking about life after social media. So the changes in those things as a revenue challenge, how do you think about them and what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think the Facebook, pivot toward news and toward video and then away from those things has been happening for some time. So I'm not aware of any kind of recent changes in that. Twitter, I think we've seen a slight dip from my understanding in kind of impressions, but I really want to emphasize that on average, Twitter generates 3% of kind of page impressions for most publishers. I generally agree with, I think, the emerging consensus that, Twitter as an elite conversation and reaching influencers, sure. But Twitter as a way to do mass distribution, especially to communities of ordinary people, working people, not the most effective way. So, I am part of the camp that says, we're certainly not compelling anyone to be on Twitter. We're not compelling anyone to be off Twitter, but let's be thoughtful and judicious about how we use the platform.
Yeah, I want to come back to Terry on this, but I just want to follow up with you for a second, Sewell. That is almost certainly true about Twitter and as a mass medium, which, it isn't. But one of the Tribune's greatest strengths has been its place in the Texas ecosystem, right? And Twitter, I would think, has been a very big part of that, no?
It has been, again, in shaping the debate. I'm not saying everyone get off Twitter. What I guess I am saying, though, is like just in raw numbers, search accounts for an exponentially bigger share of traffic to the Texas Tribune and our articles than all social media combined, I believe. I think search, for many of our newsrooms is something like a third to 40% of traffic. Then there's also the off platform, being on Apple News, Smart News, all these other, Reddit even, there are other ways of doing things. And then of course the communities that we host, right? And then I think the next frontier is going to be text messaging and apps. But yeah, in terms of especially, serving a news obsessed audience like we have here in Austin because it's the state capital, and also to some extent in DC, yeah, I would not recommend that we hop off or boycott anytime soon. But I think that's more about kind of shaping the discourse and getting our content out to decision makers and influencers. That's very, very important. But I see that as somewhat distinct from reaching the mass audiences that we also need to reach, especially new audiences who have not yet encountered our brand and who have not yet experienced our content, of whom there are still, frankly, millions.
Terry, your thoughts on this before we go to the next question?
Yeah, for us, social media has not been, it's really not something that we're factoring in at all in our calculations.
Okay. Terry, another one for you. This from Jim Friedlich of Lenfest. Evan Smith has said that political contributions, red or blue, are much better nonprofit donor prospects than donors to the opera, museum, or university. Can you offer advice on approaching these kinds of donors and yet at the same time remaining nonpartisan?
Right. So what we do is we definitely do think that showing an interest through giving or other types of engagement with the political process does tend to bring us great prospects. but we do layer on other research, because actually supporting the arts, supporting other causes, actually showing that philanthropic commitment is a big part of what distinguishes one prospect from another for us. But we have had luck talking with political donors, but we try to not use politics as the reason for them to be giving to us. So the way we might start off that conversation is saying, we can tell through, your various forms of giving that you have a sincere commitment to Texas. But we stray away from, going too far into, that political conversation. Politics is a great door opener for us, but we also don't want to confuse people about who we are and what we do. We have encountered that from time to time, where at the end of a year, someone will say, I can't make a gift to you all. I've already done my political giving for the year. And I'm like, ugh, we're journalism. That something got, mixed up in the wash there. So it is a great prospect identification tool that we use, but we also try to layer in other interests as well.
Just a quick follow-up to that. So Texas is a red state, but it's a relatively closely balanced state. And if you were in a really solidly red state or a really solidly blue state, of which there are quite a few at this point in the country, would you approach that issue any differently?
Could I chime in if you don't mind, Terry? Texas is a pretty red state in terms of electoral outcomes. I don't think that the median voter here is certainly more conservative than the median voter in California, but the median voter here is probably less conservative than the state legislature, right? For all sorts of reasons, redistricting, gerrymandering, et cetera. I feel that it would be different if we were in, say, Oklahoma, which is one of the most red states in the country, or West Virginia or Wyoming. I believe some of those states are represented at this conference.
Or California.
Or California in the other direction. Look, I would say that this is subtle, but there are distinctions between the politics message, the public policy message, and the democracy message. There are some people who are inherently interested in the jot and thrust of electoral competition. That's great, but to be honest, in a hyperpolarized time, I think that sometimes emphasizing policy, like the event we had this week, really was focusing on our health, education, and environment coverage. I don't think either political party was ever mentioned, but policies and regulations and laws and how they impact communities, heavily focused on. And for a lot of the foundations that really want to see, they're a little bit more, I don't want to say technocratic, but they're more focused on like what can be done in the time we're in to make policies better, to improve people's lives, while recognizing that there's going to be profound disagreement that's not reconcilable anytime soon on things like, abortion. I think that's an important community. And then finally, I would argue that there's the democracy community, if you will, right? All of us should be invested in journalism, especially state and local journalism, as a public good for which there has been market failure. And I find that using that framework sometimes is understandable to people, especially from the business community. They are starting to recognize that a deeply misinformed society, having so many people susceptible to misinformation, also, frankly, hurts these companies as employers, and also, hurts the ability to attract investment and even attract consumers. You have to be careful and subtle, but I think that these are, it's all related, but not everyone, as Terry says, wants to do politics. And others, I think, are more attracted to the public policy stuff and the larger, question of improving the quality of our information ecosystem in America.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We really do quickly move to those types of issues. And I have to say, like, the common denominator among our donors is about, access to quality information, and that every Texan deserves, to be well informed and to be able to access information on their schools and on healthcare and all the other issues that affect their daily lives. And that sort of grounding and basis is really, sort of the idea that we don't have a paywall, and that their philanthropy is making all of this access possible, is really what at the end of the day attracts people. I think I may have mentioned this to you, Dick, that we have some very major donors who I don't even know if they read the Tribune that often, but they believe in the mission and the purpose behind it. And so much so that they're willing to invest in it. And I think that that's where we try to go with these conversations is about what access to information, or the flip side, the lack of access to information, what it does. Texas is still woefully behind in a lot of the measures of civic engagement, including voter turnout. And so we try to focus on the, what a healthy civic life, what contributes to it. And we know access to quality journalism is part of that.
Yeah. Especially in a world where they can't get you heat downtown in the Capitol. Just before we're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask both of you, when you came to these relationships, Sewell, you more recently, Terry, you some time ago, what were the one or two surprising do's or don'ts that you encountered in working with, if you'll forgive me, Sewell, the other side of the equation?
I would say it's an obvious one, but never assume anyone's politics. I don't assume that because someone gives to us, I have any clue what their other political priorities are. Evan likes to say that we've had some of the most liberal liberals and some of the most conservative conservatives give to the Texas Tribune. And I think it's very important that we preserve that. Now, again, the messaging could be a little bit different, right? I mean, with the more liberal side of funders, you often emphasize kind of the vulnerable communities and their needs. Sometimes with the more conservative side, you emphasize the basics, like we are all harmed if misinformation, disinformation, and mistrust continue to flourish. That just doesn't make any part of governance, whether you're conservative or liberal, any easier. It doesn't make it easy to develop consensus and to move forward as a society. And frankly, it's at a certain point, economically pretty counterproductive to have people, kind of mired in, conspiracies and all that other bad stuff that's really harming our politics. So, I don't make an assumption. I mean, when I'm talking to someone, I eventually get guided and start to understand better where they're coming from or what messages might resonate. But I think, don't assume, I think we all succeed more if we're able to make the case for local journalism in a way that is, really can reach across a very, very broad spectrum.
Terry, any final thought along those or other lines?
I think the thing that still surprises me day in, day out is that that there are people who don't see that there's a problem with local news. And it just is stunning to me. That is probably the thing that keeps me up at night, if anything else. And then, working with the newsroom has actually been a joy for me. I did, there's a lot that I've learned about working with the journalists, but what I always have loved about nonprofit fundraising, because even I don't really enjoy asking people for money, but what I love doing is funding people who are clearly so passionate about their work and they're doing exactly what they, were meant to do, and making that possible is such a joy.
Excellent. Annie, I think I'd like you to bring us home here, but I just want to say for myself how much of a pleasure it was to talk with Terry Quinn, the Chief Development Officer, and Sewell Chan, the Editor-in-Chief of the Texas Tribune. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did.
Well, thank you so much. I totally enjoyed it. And I love the fact that we left on the note about the joy of fundraising and the importance of local news, no matter who you are and where you sit. Reminds us all of why our work is so important and why we're all so dedicated to this mission. I just want to thank the three of you so much for a wonderful conversation. I really think this was a perfect way to wrap up the summit. And I want to thank everyone who's been with us for an excellent 2 days. We're so glad you're part of this community, and we want to continue to make sure that the News Philanthropy Network programming is useful.